Hi, my name is Seth, and I am an MCAT tutor here at Shemmassian Academic Consulting. And today I'm going to be covering a CARS passage using the text evidence CARS strategy. So the idea behind the text evidence strategy is that in every CARS passage with the questions that follow, there's going to be some amount of evidence in the passage to support the correct answer. And so using the text evidence strategy, you will focus in on only picking out answers that you can find text evidence for. So the way I like to approach it is going through the answer options, finding what feels best to me, and then referring to the passage to find the evidence for that. If I can't find evidence for it or there's evidence against, then I'll reevaluate. Well, the overall idea is just finding that evidence so that you make sure all of your answer options that you choose are backed by the actual evidence in the passage. So what we're going to do is we're going to find and highlight that evidence and do our best to incorporate it into the answer options. And so we're going to wait to do that highlighting until we're searching at the end. We're not going to do so much highlighting and writing throughout the passage as we might with other strategies. All right, so we are going to jump into the passage. New readers of diasporic literature may wonder, why do writers of the diaspora appear to be so fascinated by the quotidian? Rather than dedicate their attention to crafting a fast-moving plot or conjuring up a colorful cast of characters, diasporic writers seem to hold a particular fondness for painstakingly describing the minutiae and mundane rhythms of everyday life. So because I'm going to need to come back to the passage, I like to create kind of a mental map, knowing where I might, to move quicker, where I might find different types of information. So, this first one, I'm just going to remember diaspora intro. You can write that down if you want. You don't have to. I'm going to write it down just for an example, diaspora intro. Okay. One might turn to posting tycoon Keegan Place for an answer. Place lamented that this all too familiar repertoire of mundane literary images had blundered into the diasporic writer's toolkit when the diasporic literary genre chanced into the American reading scene 10 years ago. Place explains that a few major literary themes stuck then, enjoyed commercial success, and now are widely imitated by diasporic writers, who hoped for and often do get their big break. He gave examples, the lush lychee leaving a sticky sweet residue upon a young boy's chin, and the grandmother painstakingly brewing a traditional root tincture for her petulant American grandchild. Place quipped with a knowing chuckle that the lychee could be swapped for the mango or some other bizarre fruit, and that the monolingual grandmother usually speaks no English and the ungrateful grandchild no Cantonese or Tamil. To him, there is nothing to be distinguished between a mango and lychee, nor between Tamil and Cantonese. In his eyes, the ideal diasporic story is manufactured and consumed with ease, rather than to be modified upon and digested. The diasporic literature genre is merely iterations of the same saccharine template to satisfy John and Sally's appetite for the exotic. Okay, so overall, this paragraph seems to be talking about like Place's thoughts, Keegan Place. So I'm just going to put that way I know where to go when they bring up something about, if they bring up something about Place. The two vignettes of the fruit and grandmother admittedly resemble motifs found in the writing of both influential and budding diasporic writers, including Soon Lee. However, an examination of Lee's debut novel, The Corner Place, shows that its motif of a sun-ripened foreign fruit is not simply a decorative means of catering to the masses, but instead deftly used to evoke nostalgic longing for a faraway imagined homeland that had been irrevocably marked by political violence. A sentiment essential to the plot. Critic Sky Tran comments on this strategy. For the young female protagonist, the ritual of shopping for and cleaning, drying, and eating persimmons helps her cope with her mother's recent death. The persimmons transport the narrator back to the times that her normally reticent mother would reminisce about their home island before the 1998 massacre, an overlooked moment in the country's history. The persimmons in America don't taste as sweet as the ones your grandmother grew in Jekka. I wish you could visit one day. See for yourself, my mother told me. Okay, so I mean, we want to capture the main ideas as we're going along. We're trying to be attentive because although we're going to come back to find evidence in the passage, we want to make sure we're still paying attention. So I'm starting to notice some contrasting ideas. But it seems to be focused on Soon Lee and supporting arguments for Soon Lee. So But Soonly plus support. So I know there's something going on with Soonly and support there when I need to go back. Lee, a novelist essayist, identifies as a diasporic writer, in contrast to an immigrant or refugee writer, distinct identifications that merit attention on their own time. As a member of the diaspora, Lee draws from her family's experiences to write about communities dispersed from their home country by both forced and voluntary migration, who nevertheless maintain simultaneous cultural, political, and emotional affiliations to the places to which they have relocated, as well as to their previous homelands. No matter the single national allegiance stamped on the outside of their passport, Lee beautifully tells the stories that undergird all migrations and the people who undertake them, while highlighting the history of power differentials that engender and result from coerced migration today. Okay, so I'm just going to put Lee writing type. So I know that they're talking about how he writes. Similarly, Japanese Peruvian literary theorist and poet Lila Kuei writes that her fellow writers of the diaspora choose to utilize descriptions of commonplace objects or situations within diasporic life because the skillful utilization of domestic and seemingly innocuous fictionalized motifs enable us to better introduce weighty topics like asylum reform and migrant labor rights to mainstream readers, topics that publishing giants like Placé might otherwise refuse to market because they are deemed discomfiting, unsettling, and economically unsound. Okay, so I'm just going to put their Quay's thoughts. I forgot an H. Oh, no, maybe I didn't. Okay. For new readers, then, a better answer might be diasporic writers upset the very idea of the quotidian by legitimizing it against a historical and political backdrop with lyrically potent and philosophically poignant detail. Literary projects like The Corner Place tell rich stories of ordinary people and objects, and in doing so, disposes of the idea that the commonplace and domestic are dispensable. Lee shows how Lee shows how extraordinary circumstances of transnational exploitation, of global power struggle, and of resultant oceanic migrations have become normalized, such that extraordinary migrants have become ordinary, and everyday things like persimmon have become gateways to extraordinary storytelling potential. Okay. I'm going to put here sums up true diaspora. Okay, so I wrote down, this might seem like I'm doing the passage outline method here because I'm writing stuff down with each passage. You don't need to write the stuff down. I just wanted to write down what I would like mentally take a note of because I want a mental map. Because if I'm going to come back to the passage, I don't have time to scan the whole passage looking for one detail. I want to know generally where stuff is at, which you might remember well, without thinking about it too much. But this helps me to have a mental map of where I need to go to find evidence to support my answers that I pick. So let's jump into the answer options and questions and answers, and we'll go through the rest of the process. 1. Which of the following adjectives would Placé and Quay use respectively to describe diasporic literature? Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to try and deduce this down or narrow it down to what I feel like the answer would be, and then I'm going to search for evidence in support of my answer. The reason I do that is because you don't have time to check, inane and simplistic, go back to the passage, look for something, come back. Like that's going to take you years. So what I'm going to do is try to figure out the right answer and look for evidence to support it. If I can't find evidence to support it, then maybe I need to reevaluate. So A, inane and simplistic. I don't think Quay would describe, given what we read, that she would describe diasporic literature as simplistic. B, incisive and meritorious. Quay might say it's meritorious, like it's got merit, but incisive, Placé was talking really in negatively about it, so I wouldn't say he would deem it incisive. C, derivative, insightful. I like that one. We'll come back to that. D, comforting and alarming. Placé again was derogatory. He wasn't saying it was comforting. He didn't praise it really at all. And Quay, alarming? No, I don't think so. Okay, so C, derivative and insightful. Now let's go back to the passage. If we're looking, we're talking about Placé and Quay. So we know where those two things are. We got Placé's thoughts and Quay's thoughts. So we know where to identify those where to look. If we look through here, Placid lamented is all too familiar. Repertoire, maybe all too familiar kind of means derivative. There's also like a few major literary themes stuck. That could be kind of like a derivative thing. Okay, and then down here bottom, it's just a saccharine template. Like if you're using a template, that's like whatever you've written is derivative of something else. So I like that. And then with the, what was it? Insightful was the other word. Yeah, insightful. We're reading here that Quay says that skillful utilization, blah, blah, blah. Fictional motifs enable us to better introduce weighty topics. Okay, so almost like there's more, like there's something else. So I like what she says here in her quote, like that supports the insightful idea to me. So we're going to go with C. 2. According to the author's description of Placé, one might likely infer which of the following statements about Placé. A. Placé's insights are humorously excuse me. Plasé's insights are humorously educational and indicative of his experience in publishing. Okay, so, I didn't get anything humorously educational from the reading. B, Placé is jealous of the commercial success of diasporic literature and wants to imitate it. I got the vibe that he'd be happy if it's successful because he's a publisher, right? C, Placé generally does not know that Cantonese and Tamil are different languages. When he was talking about Cantonese and Tamil, I believe he was just talking about they're interchangeable as far as the exotic side of diasporic writing. So I'm not going to pick that. D, Placé possesses a self-important attitude that minimizes the legitimacy of diasporic literature. Okay, so I like D. Let's go find some evidence for it. Okay, so we already highlighted like the all too familiar, like in the with the apostrophes at the end, like something that's like all too familiar, like almost kind of derogatory. He lamented. Placé quipped with a knowing chuckle, like almost like he's just kind of mocking it. And then saying like the saccharine template to satisfy John and Sally's appetite for the exotic. Like that's evidence enough for me that he's got a self-important attitude. So I like D, and he's minimizing the legitimacy of diasporic literature. 3, how would Quay most likely respond to Tran's interpretation of the persimmon motif in the corner place? Okay, so Quay, we're talking about Quay and Tran. We know where both those are in the passage. If we wanted to go, reevaluate them, we could like read about Tran here. Oh. Read about Tran right through here, and then we could come read about Quay. Or you might have an idea of it from what you read. So Quay and Tran, from my interpretation of the passage, they seem to be in agreement with each other. So let's look at the answer options. A, Quay would agree because the corner place exemplifies how writing suspenseful plots with eccentric characters are outside of the skill set of diasporic writers. I don't recall there being anywhere that they said that there was something outside of the skill set. We're talking about eccentric characters. Like that just seems out of place. B, Quay would agree because the persimmon is a literary tool used by Lee to urge greater awareness of a historical tragedy. I like that one. We'll come back to it. C, Quay would dismiss Tran as a mainstream reader who does not understand the nuances of the 1998 massacre. Okay, so, well, no, dismissing Tran, that's not an agreement. And why would she dismiss him when it seems like he was talking about those tools that she supported as well? D, Quay would disagree because Lee's image of the persimmon has no relationship to serious topics. Okay, there was relationship to serious topics from what I can remember, but let's look at B. Quay would agree because the persimmon is a literary tool used by Lee to urge greater awareness of historical tragedy. Okay, so let's go back and look at that. Okay, we're talking about the persimmons here, transport the narrator back to times that before the 1998 massacre. That seems like a pretty heavy item there. Something more than just talking about the persimmon. And then like the overall ideas that they've left, and there's things different, and like they've got some amount of like psychological trauma maybe from that event. So that historical tragedy, and the persimmon, like I feel like that there is a connection there and that works well. So I'm choosing answer B. 4. Someone who agrees with the author's arguments in the passage would most likely be opposed to which of the following situations or statements. So we want to highlight opposed because we got opposed. A diasporic and immigrant writers should be shelved under different literary categories, even though they both discuss migration. So there was a place in here that it talked about diasporic writers and immigrant writers being like all like deserving their own category. So I don't think that's opposing. B, diasporic literary writers merit invitation to international human rights conferences. Maybe they do. I mean, that's kind of out of left field, but I mean, I'm not gonna like, it's not enough information to say that, like, there's not enough information in a passage to say that this opposes anything. C, a major weakness of the diasporic literature genre is that it aims to coddle the general reading public. Okay, that seems like it opposes what I recall from the passage, but we'll hold on to that one. D, diasporic literature genre proves that working class people are more exciting characters to read about than wealthy, extraordinary people. I mean, I think that statement like might be wrong, but it's not wrong because it opposes something in the passage. It's wrong because it's not really even talked about in the passage. So I'm going to get rid of that one. All right, so I like C. I'm going to go check for evidence first. So major weakness is that it's coddling the general public. So I'm going to go like something that stands out to me in my mental map is that like the idea behind the diasporic literature is to introduce weighty topics. That doesn't seem like they're coddling. Coerced migration, global power struggle, extraordinary migrants, so like there's all these ideas that just seem to be the opposite of them coddling. And so I'm going to go with C. 5. Suppose that Place includes one of Soon Lee's novels to his publishing company's yearly selection of must-read books. One can infer that the author of the passage would most likely attribute Place's decision to which of the following lines of reasoning. Okay, so Place was pretty derogatory about the literature, but he is a publishing tycoon, so he stands to benefit something from books. 1, his appreciation of the literary and historical merit of Soon Lee's novel. I don't feel like that was like him being derogatory. He didn't seem to care about the merit or what was in it. 2, the book's ability to meet a reading preference among American readers. I mean, I feel like that was in line with his role as the publisher tycoon. 3, marketing the book is an economically sound decision for the publishing company. That's another publisher decision that would be beneficial for him. So I want to go with D, but let's go look for evidence real quick. Okay, so I mean, it says he's the publishing tycoon. He talks really derogatorily, but it says that there's some people getting their big break. They're having a lot of success with the books. So just the fact that he's the publishing tycoon, we can assume like the way he talked about the books and his role, like he's tied to the books, but he's not particularly interested in them. He just wants whatever the publishing benefit would be. So we're gonna go with D. 6. Which of the following pieces of writing would best exemplify Quay's vision of what the passage calls the diasporic genre? Okay. Best exemplify Quay's vision of what the passage calls the diasporic genre. So, I mean, if we want to reevaluate Quay's vision, we've got it right here. So we can go read about it. And we know where we'll need to go to find evidence. So A, a newspaper article written by a Korean Canadian about rising interest in Korean traditional pottery by Finnish museums. I mean, there's not like a weighty matter being discussed there. That just doesn't seem to be in line with what Quay was talking about. B, a fictional memoir focusing on the daily mistreatment and hostile working conditions experienced by a farm worker in California. Hostile working conditions, that sounds a little more weighty. If you're talking about just like the normal life and the mistreatment, like that might be a good thing in line with Quay's vision. C, a poetry book containing love poems with titles inspired by the names of different ingredients in Japanese Peruvian ceviche. Okay, so a poetry book containing love poems doesn't appear to be a weighty matter to me. It doesn't really have a tie to immigration besides mentioning, Japanese Peruvian ceviche. That's just kind of a bad answer. D, a novel written in the form of letters exchanged between Chinese sisters living in Chile and Ghana as they talk about their marital spats and employment struggles as immigrants. Okay, I like that one. So we come down to B and D. Let's go look at Quay's information. Okay, so the skillful utilization of domestic and seemingly innocuous fictionalized motifs enable us to better introduce weighty topics like asylum reform and migrant labor rights to mainstream readers. So she talks specifically about migrants. We've got mention of migrants here in D, but we don't have mention of migrants here in B. And the idea behind the diaspora is that's talking about migration issues. So B is tempting, but it's not as explicitly stated as, or explicitly, in line as D is. So we're going to get rid of B and go with D. All right, so that is the text evidence method. And we moved fairly quick through it because, like I said, I like to find what I think is the right answer, then find evidence for it. There'll be varying degrees of that. Like with question 6, we had to look into B and D for text evidence. And there's some of them like 3 where you knew he was a tycoon. So that's about as much text evidence as you need. There'll be varying levels of like time you have to dedicate to find the evidence in the passage. But the idea is that you just want to make sure you're efficiently doing it. That's why I like to make that, kind of a mental map of where things are at so I can move quicker. And also, like, don't dive into every single answer option, like scouring for evidence for or against it, because you don't have that kind of time. But again, it's a very useful method. I particularly like to use this method if I feel like I'm in a pickle and I can't decide between answer options. I don't feel super drawn to one or the other. There's probably something I missed, and I can go find that text evidence in the passage. So give it a try, give it some practice, see how it works out for you, and just know you can have it in your arsenal of useful methods for CARS passages. And good luck with all the studying.